This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Have you been thinking about therapy? Have you been trying to get in to see a therapist? Have you found that a lot of therapists that you've been recommended to have either closed books or they've got a really long waiting list? Sometimes months. If you're lucky, it's a couple of weeks. Now, what if there was an alternative that gave you quicker access and at your convenience? So when starting to think about looking for a therapist, try BetterHelp. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient and flexible to your schedule needs. So just fill out the brief questionnaire and get matched with a registered therapist. You can also switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. So get moving with therapy and visit BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/Gunter today will give you 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/Gunter, GUNTER.
Listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. To guide us through the intricacies and intersections of emotions, relationships, and male identity is renowned psychologist, author, and speaker Gunter Swoboda. This is Inspire Change.
Before I begin the actual podcast, I would like to respectfully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the land on which I work. I would also like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. Welcome everybody to another episode of Inspire Change with Gunter. I'm your host.
So, what's today's topic? Well, I thought what we would do is continue with the cornerstones in patriarchal masculinity and looking at how they affect men's lives, women's lives, children's lives, and see what it is that we could do to make a difference. Again, essentially to inspire change. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about competition and combativeness in men's lives. Now, when most of you hear the word competition, you're immediately going to think about education, competing for better grades, and also looking at the competition in adult life. So what am I talking about there? Well, competing for jobs, positions at universities, looking about how to increase my economic position, and then if I'm running a business, how to be competitive with others, other businesses. And so it's quite an involved sort of story. What about combativeness? Well, combativeness is fundamentally about when competition gets us to the point where we might be frustrated, we might have a conflict of opinion, and so we get it basically into a fight. Now, let me take a little bit of a developmental perspective on this. When it comes to competition and combativeness, boys from early on are encouraged to compete, to be the best, whether that's on the sporting field, in the classroom, or later in their careers, as I've said. But one of the things that's really important in this is that we need to ask ourselves, what are the costs of this particular mentality? Not just to our well-being, but to our relationships and how we view ourselves in the mirror. Now, let me make a very big point here. This whole attitude isn't simply confined to boys and men. Girls and women apply the same principles in their lives. They're expected to, because the system is geared like that. You know, the primacy of competition and fighting for what you want, desire, need is accepted as normal. But is it? Let me pose an argument. What if these characteristics aren't biological evolutionary drives for dominance and territory? What if they are social constructs? Now, one of the things that we do know from lots of research is that inherently what makes human beings truly successful is not competition. It's the capacity to be altruistic and to collaborate, to cooperate with each other. Think about it. Go hunting for a big deer or a bison or a woolly mammoth. It's one single human being, or even just two single human beings on the hunt for an animal like that is more than likely going to end up dead. They won't be successful. And with that death, so does their genetic line. So what becomes an incredibly important characteristic at this point in time, and this is also demonstrated in the animal world, is the capacity to hunt collaboratively. Wolves do it. Orcas do it to a really high degree of sophistication. So do dolphins. Okay? So we need to drop the evolutionary psychological explanation that competition and combativeness is simply part of human nature, and especially men's nature. So, one of the consequences of this, if we do not challenge this, is that our capacity to live in a connected way and fulfill what Professor Mark Williams talks about as the connected species, is we're going to suffer from a heightened degree of stress, a sense of isolation, and a perpetual experience of dissatisfaction. So what effect does competition and combativeness have on male relationships? What's it do? So one way of looking at this is to look at friendships, where in many friendships there's a subtle interaction of competition. Who has the better job, the nicer car, the more perfect family? How much greater wealth, financial wealth, asset wealth does the person have? Now, this sort of environment can turn friends into rivals, diminishing the potential for genuine support and camaraderie. Now, this is the problem. Competition, has a dark side to it. And that dark side is not just that we're going to get more into a combative relationship, but in fact, we have the dark side of the depth of the blackness of our soul. The worst of humanity can emerge in this. So let me give you a simple example. Let's take two friends, Marcus and Ethan, for example. Now, once they were inseparable, but their friendship began to crack under the pressure of competing for the same job promotion. Now, this story is all too common and shows, it really does, provide a good example of how competition can result in combativeness and then, erode the foundations of even the strongest bonds. We know, all of us know of some friendships that have just completely broken down and sometimes have resulted in a physical altercation. So again, as in the last podcast, what I want to challenge people to do is to begin to redefine success and masculinity. What is this truly about? Now, I am always out there challenging the conventional, traditional narrative about who we're supposed to be as men and how we're supposed to be. So imagine valuing men not just for their ability to outperform one another, but for their capacity for empathy, understanding, and cooperation. What about including compassion and being distributed with what we've got, it really then sets the scene for all of us to redefine what it is that we mean by success. And especially not to simply see it as a solitary climb to the top of some imaginary mountain, but as a journey we can all share in. And this is the important aspect of it. Ultimately, we're in this together. Think of it from an ecological point of view. You know, that whole idea of competing for resources has done nothing but, put us into a position of competing with each other for the biggest chunk of the pie, much to the detriment of most human beings and, most importantly, to our ecology. Now, we live in a finite environment. There is a limit to how much you can exploit out of that environment. But people seem to forget that. They simply think that we can keep on going. Our economic system is based on a model of infinite growth. What a paradoxical idea that is. And yet we have very few people in the field of economics and commerce who challenge this idea. Fortunately, the number of people who are challenging this idea is growing. There are more people willing to put their head on the block and go, what we've accepted is not right. We are not living in a meritocracy. We are not living in a fair economic system. We are living in a rigged scam that disadvantages 95 or more percent of the population and advantages especially the top 1 to 5%. And yet that top 1 to 5% is the one that's telling us, the rest of us, to tighten our belts, that life's difficult, that there isn't enough. But they have, enough wealth to squander on meaningless stuff at a time when we're looking to be ecologically more thoughtful. The number of private jets and super yachts is growing because the wealthy, that 1 to 5%, their wealth is growing exponentially at the deficit of the rest of us. Now, I don't have a problem with getting wealthy and, distributing that wealth fairly. I'll give you for instance, I just recently read about a billionaire in the United States. She's 93 years old, and she has just donated $1 billion to medical research. When I look at people like Bezos and Musk, most of their money goes into self-aggrandizing projects. And yes, a lot of people argue that, there's a wealth of knowledge and benefits for humanity through the space program and so on. And there's a part of me that accepts that. Don't get me wrong. I like technology. I'm an early adopter and adapter to technology, as my wife would tell you. If you look at my computing system and so on, you'll get the picture. But I have a problem when that pursuit totally outweighs the benefits that could be had with some of those financial resources in other areas. A really truly civilized society combats poverty, disease, and inequity and racism before it tackles other problems. I'm not saying that we shouldn't do it, but I'm talking about having an ethically moral foundation for it that actually gives us the opportunity to feel good about ourselves, because most of us actually don't quite feel good about ourselves. Hence, we've got massive mental health problems and so on. Now, where does this all come from? It comes from this notion that we need to protect our territory. We all are participating in a hierarchy. We need to be acquisitional. We need to be competitive. And worst comes to worst, we need to fight for it. And the current geopolitical conflicts are a really good example of that. If we really truly want to make a dent in all that ails us individually and culturally and socially and globally, we need to establish a body of people coming together to focus on deconstructing patriarchal values, attitudes, opinions, and behaviors in our culture. They need to become humanistic. And so, yes, in many respects, I'm also pointing the finger at things like the monotheistic religions, which are by definition patriarchal. And until they change to stop being patriarchal and perceive women as truly equal to men, we've got a problem. And so far, there is a huge fight going on in Christianity about that. And there is a huge, huge fight going on within Islam. And in Judaism, they don't fight about it. They simply accept it. As an outsider, that's my observation. Although there are reform schools in Judaism that see this very differently. But they're a minority. We need to stick our heads together politically, economically, socially, to begin to create an environment that is much, much more specific, strategic, and tactical in taking away the temptations of patriarchy. The United States at the moment is fundamentally losing the war on protecting democracy. And how has that come about? By the Christian nationalists promoting a toxic system of beliefs that is inherently patriarchal. And yes, part of this is political, but it's predominantly more about our psyche, our evolution of consciousness, our personal growth. If I grow as a human being, I do not accept toxic relationships. I don't accept toxic ideologies. I will stand up against them. And in some instances, people who do that, like Navalny and many, many others who fought for their principles for a more humanistic culture and community, they risk their lives. They really are putting their lives on the line. So if we want to be healthy individuals, we need to participate in a process of, firstly, emotional growth, psychological growth, social growth, and then we need to encourage the community to follow that trend. And anything that deviates from that needs to be addressed. Germany's got a very interesting problem that they're facing at the moment, and that is the rise of the ultra-right political party. Now, they have a youth arm, and the best way to describe that youth arm is that they're radicalising the youth of Germany. Those who participate in it are being radicalised. Germany's contemplating outlawing that youth arm. And people go, oh, what about free speech? There's a limit to free speech. If you choose to speak out against, cultured, civilized values and attitudes and beliefs, you begin to forfeit that right. You become, in a sense, someone who is choosing to cause harm. So as we conclude today's discussion, I want to invite you, as always, to reflect, in this instance, on, your own competitive and combative dynamics in your life. How can you foster a more supportive environment among, firstly, the men around you, but then within the family, within the community? How can we all contribute to a culture that celebrates collaboration, mutual growth, and compassion and care? So, as always, the other challenge is if you're a bloke, challenge yourself to redefine what masculinity means to you. And if it nudges too closely to the patriarchal thing, it's time to rethink and to make a shift. It's worth it. Your relationship with yourself is going to be better, and so are your relationships with others. We want to move towards a future where we champion each other's success, where we lift each other up instead of pushing each other down. Even the International Space Station ultimately was a collaborative effort. So, join me in the first of a series called Insights into Humanity. This episode is a journey into the heart of masculinity, neuroanthropology, and the transformative potential of human culture with the eminent Professor Greg Downey. Professor Greg Downey is a leading figure in anthropology, much renowned for his innovative work in neuroanthropology, a field that blends neuroscience with anthropological insights to understand human behavior in its cultural context. His research offers profound implications for rethinking masculinity, humanity as a whole, and shedding light on how social norms and cultural practices shape male identity and behaviors. In this enlightening episode, we delve deep into the fabric of what it means to be a man in today's world. In fact, what it means to be human in today's world, and how we can gain insights from other cultures. Now, this might be challenging conventional narratives, but it's also about uncovering pathways to better emotional and psychological growth. So please join me and Professor Greg Downey in the upcoming episode, Insights into Humanity. So if you want to, please share your journey with us and let's inspire change together.
This is me signing off. Love to hear from you. And if you're interested, please check out my work on www.gunterswoboda.com or www.goodmengreat.com.
Thank you for listening to Inspire Change, a broadcast that strives to educate, motivate, and empower men to challenge traditions of masculinity. For more information on the Making Good Men Great movement, or for individual or group coaching sessions with Gunter, visit goodmengreat.com. For inquiries regarding broadcast topics or appearing on the show, email Miranda at noirtainment.com. That's Miranda at noirtainment.com.